Hi, everyone. I'm Iris, and I lead the internationalization and localization team at Facebook here. We are super excited to be hosting IMUG for the first time ever, and here on the Facebook campus in Menlo Park. So welcome to Facebook, everyone. Thank you. As you all know, content on the internet has been growing and growing and growing. And with it, translation is in demand, and in more demand, and in more demand. People really today expect to find content in a language that they understand, and we as an industry are responsible for delivering on this. So I would like to introduce Romaine, the CTO and co-founder of Gengo, a hot new startup from Tokyo, Japan. And Gengo is a company that really is helping us to tackle this global translation challenge by applying the power of the crowd. So very excited.
Great. Thanks. As Iris mentioned, I actually am based in Tokyo, but we have an office in San Mateo, and sharing a little bit about the Gengo story at IMUG was a great excuse to come on out. So thanks for being here. Before I get started, I'd like to sort of get a sense of the audience. How many of you know what Gengo means? A few of you. OK, cool. So for those who don't, it means language in Japanese. We actually started as My Gengo. We dropped the my, kind of like the Facebook dropping the. And so we are based in Japan. And so to understand sort of the Gengo story, I want to share a little bit about the founding team. So my co-founder and I are both have sort of a multicultural background. My co-founder and CEO, Rob, he's half Australian, half British. And he spent a lot of time in Hong Kong and living in Hong Kong as well as Belgium. And myself, I'm half Japanese and half American. Sometimes I get mistaken for an Italian, but it must be the eyebrows, I don't know. And so we were both living in Japan and sort of had this challenge around translation from different perspectives. So in Rob's case, his wife is Japanese, and they were living in Japan, and he was trying to read sort of these newsletters and blog posts and get acclimated with the environment. And he had to keep asking his wife to translate this kind of content. In my case, my background is an engineer. And I used to work at Sony. And although I was hired and was doing engineering development, I started to find myself doing more and more sort of translation of my colleagues' emails and some of their project files and stuff. So I thought, is this really kind of the best use of the company resources? And so that experience was left in my mind. And eventually, the English-speaking web community in Japan is pretty small. And we crossed paths, and we sort of shared this experience and realized maybe there's a way we can harness the internet, harness the large volume of potentially bilingual people online. And around the same time, Amazon's Mechanical Turk and Odesk were sort of capturing some mind share with their sort of general crowdsourcing offerings. And so we thought, well, maybe we can sort of focus on translation. So that's when we decided to get together and launch a site to sort of solve this problem that we had. And our first version was real simple. Simple form, simple objective, just paste some text and we'll get it translated. And ironically, our first translators were our friends and family. But the translator networks, they're quite connected, and we started to find more Japanese. It was both Japanese to English in both directions was our initial sort of language pair that we launched. And initially, our objective was, if we launched a site and made a few $1,000s a month, that'd be fine, and because we were doing sort of web development work. But we started to notice that the content that users were submitting was the kind of stuff that we didn't quite expect. It was really short form. Here's sort of a short list. And we see sort of blog posts. Well, the alignment's a little wrong. Sorry about that. Should be how-to articles and customer support messages. I guess the font's a little different. But so the point is, we thought it's kind of an interesting use case, and how can we make it easier for the users to actually request translations of this type of content? And it's mostly user-generated, sort of long tail. And we thought, well, maybe how can we get in front of them instead of having the users always have to come to Gengo.com to order translations? So that led to the idea of creating an API. And as most of you probably are familiar with, an API helps facilitate plugging in a feature in any kind of platform. So we took sort of a couple pages from Flickr and Twilio and launched a sandbox environment and provided all this documentation online and client libraries. It made it really easy for developers to basically send content and get it back through our API. And I'll get into sort of how we got the translators and everything later on. But this was pretty key. And so after we launched this, as I mentioned, customer support requests and sort of that kind of content was pretty popular. And so we thought, well, it'd be kind of neat to integrate with Zendesk. And so this is one of the plugins that we actually have. And what's kind of cool here is it actually combines machine translation with human translation. And I'll tell you how. Basically, if a Zendesk user receives an email in a language they don't really know or they can't read, they can click a button and get the machine translation so that they can at least consume and understand what the user is asking or needs support for. And then the agent can then type their answer in their native language, submit it in the form on the right. It's kind of washed out a little bit, but there's a text area underneath where it says translate your reply. And that gets fired off through the API to our translator network. And the translator picks it up, types the translation, sends it back. Then the agent can review it and then send it off to the original submitter. So the submitter always feels like they're interacting with an individual. So a couple other examples that we started to see that came about because of the API. So Pixta is a firm based in Japan. And they are sort of like a Shutterstock. And what they have is a large, they wanted to sort of expand internationally because they started to sort of see traffic from outside Japan. And so English, as well as the simplified and complex Chinese. And what they're translating are sort of image labels and tags and some of the photo descriptions. Now, of course, it's important to be able to see the photo when translating, because sometimes it's not just translation, but a little bit of transcreation potentially, right? And so, for example, this chair here, is it a chair or is it a stool? Like, depending on the target language, it might be kind of different, perceived differently. And so they managed to, Pixta worked with their API and managed to develop an integration where the translators can actually see the image as they're translating it and then send it back. Another example is Vestiaire. So this is an interesting firm. They're based out of France. Has anyone heard of Vestiaire before? A few of you, OK. Well, of course, the individuals in Gengo t-shirts who we call Gengons. But so Vestiaire is kind of interesting. They are a used luxury clothing reseller. They're a post-Series C startup based out of Paris. And what they have is their individuals, their users find some used jacket or shoes or a handbag or something that they don't want to use anymore and package it up and write a little bit about where it came from and send it off to the office in Paris. And I actually went to go visit, and they have this sort of 7-step process to validate the actual product and make sure it's not a fake or anything. And if everything is good, they'll flip a switch, and that product description that's originally written in French gets sent through our API to us, to Gengo, and our translators will grab it, translate it, and send it back. And so their users are really happy because they have a much larger audience of potential buyers, and then the buyers are happy because they have access to some interesting luxury items out of France. And so we found that Vestiaire is now doing about between 400 and 500 of these product descriptions a day. And at peak times, maybe during like a holiday season, it can go up to 1,000 or so. So this ability to sort of fluctuate that volume on short notice is one of the benefits of using something like an API. And then maybe some of you have heard, we also have an integration with YouTube. So we worked with their engineering team, and basically if you upload a video with subtitles, and these have to be sort of manually submitted subtitles, because I know YouTube does have the option to sort of auto-generate subtitles, I believe. But sometimes there's transcriptions, and so makes it difficult for the translator. So we just wanted to make sure that what was being sent to the translator was something that was actually made sense. And as you choose your target language, then the Gengo translators actually get to look at a video with the captions sort of split up, and they can do the translation, and then it gets sent back, and then YouTube does the merging of the content. So we started to notice some more additional, and sorry about the highlighting, I think the font's basically different, but user reviews, restaurant listings, hotel reviews. So I hope you're getting the sense that it's a lot of this user-generated sort of short-form, long-tail content. And sure enough, within our system, most of the content we have is under 500 words. So this kind of gives you a sense of, an API really helps in scaling a system that has high volume of short-form content. So that's a little bit about the history about us and sort of what we're, how we got started and what we're good at. But obviously, you're here to hear about the crowd and community that we've built and how we manage them and maintain quality. So I want to define first, what exactly do we mean by crowdsourcing? It's a pretty broad term. I remember I was at CrowdConf back in October, and Yammer had a booth there. And I thought, well, why is Yammer at CrowdConf? And so for them, their definition was, we're crowdsourcing individuals within a company. So a company is kind of like a crowdsourced model for some reason, right? That's their interpretation. So it's pretty broad. And I think crowdsourcing really gained a lot of popularity or got some visibility when obviously Facebook and Twitter and Dropbox and LinkedIn started to harness their community to try and translate their platform. And if you have, I think that's great. If you have 100 million plus users, you're doing something right. So you can harness that crowd. But I think most services don't quite have that volume of users, and so in some cases you might kind of wonder, like, can I use my crowd as well? And so we come in to assist, because we've built a crowd as well that focuses on translation. So to sort of give a high-level definition of what we mean, how we sort of define crowdsourcing, it's basically a large number of remote workers, obviously using online tools to work on huge data sets. And I'm going to tweak this a little bit as I go through and explain how we manage our crowd. So there's sort of two facets to organizing and managing a large group of people. And I think one is more sort of analytical, kind of mechanical, and then the other is more sort of human and emotional. So I'm going to focus first on how we approach managing the crowd from a more analytical stance. So one of the core pieces of our platform is what we call the pyramid. And it starts with an internal team of about 4 tops individuals, translator operations, basically. And what they do is they're responsible for listening to the company's needs on what languages we need to support and how our language quality is being maintained. And when a new language needs to be added, they'll go and find who we call a senior translator. And this individual is someone who has a professional translation background, and we interview them and we test them and make sure that they understand sort of how to use our system, and we train them a bit. And when we're ready, when we found someone who's responsible for a specific language pair, then we start finding lay translators, so regular individuals who have passed tests that we have in place. And I'll get into sort of more of the details. And then, of course, they come from a much larger applicant pool. So, of course, to fill out a language pair and to be able to provide translation for it, we have to acquire translators. And we use a bunch of online tools, and actually Facebook has been great for us at this, because you can actually do some very good targeting by language. So for example, if we wanted to add a French to English translator, we could target ads for a user who is using Facebook in French in an English-speaking country, or vice versa. And you can make some sort of assumptions about their ability to understand either language. And at least for the acquisition part, it's a good entry to the funnel. And then, of course, we have to test them. And we have a multiple choice test at first that everyone has to take. And then depending on how well they score on that test, then they have to take a written test. And I'll show some screens of what those tests look like. Then they get to work, have access to jobs that customers submit. It's a first come, first served basis. And once you claim a job, you can't squat on it, so you have to actually work on it. And you can't you can't hoard jobs either. So we try and make it as fair as possible for the translators. And then there's a bit of upskilling. So we actually try and educate them. We prepare materials, because a lot of these translators, over 80% are not professional. And so they're pretty new to translation, so they'll take some of these tests. And they have some questions like, how can I manage my time better? So I'll show a bit about what those look like. And then there's, of course, managing. And we've actually had a couple individuals who've gone, who started and climbed up. And so we've made a couple hires from the senior translator pool, for example, and one of them works in Tokyo. So it's a little bit hard to see because it's a bit washed out, but basically there's two screenshots here. On the left, it's a multiple choice test, and on the right, it's the written test. And based on the results of the multiple choice test, which we can automatically check, the translator has the option to basically whether if they want to take a standard test or a business level test. And basically, the business one is a bit more difficult. And I'll get into sort of the differences in that quality. But for example, if you score 4 out of 5, you have to take the standard test. If you score 5 out of 5, you have the option to sort of skip the basic level and take the next one. And by the way, the tests are created by the senior translator. So they're heavily involved, and they also review the tests as well. And we're always sort of generating new tests because we've seen some screenshots of these online and stuff. So in terms of the quality, there are 3 levels that we provide: standard, business, and ultra. The ultra one is kind of interesting because it actually involves 2 translators, one who actually does a translation and another who does some proofreading. So it takes a little bit longer to deliver, but you have 2 sets of eyes looking at it. And basically, this is sort of an internal 10-point system that we've developed. And the senior translators have an internally built tool to review the tests, to give it a score, and then to review actual content submitted by customers as well. And so depending on that score, a translator is bucketed into, has access to those jobs and is bucketed by these levels. And of course, translators can move up as well. So here's how it kind of looks. Most of our translators are at the standard level, and they have the option to take another test to sort of upgrade and basically get access to more jobs. And the more difficult jobs correspond to more compensation, basically. So this is where basically the educational materials, the upskilling. These are each sort of a PDF of topics that we thought would be useful and interesting for the community. And most of these were selected, the topics were sort of decided internally, but there are a few that we actually reached out to the community to ask them, what would you like to learn about? And how can we, what's something that we can teach you? So computer skills, time management, of course, language is sort of a living thing, and there's, how do you translate sort of new terms? How do you stay with pop culture? That kind of stuff. So this helps them skill up, and then after reviewing some of these, so here's an example of one inside. We try and make it fun, not like a textbook, but a bit more of a bullet-pointed checklist to apply when actually doing work as well. And hopefully, if you start off as a standard level translator, you can take a test and upgrade. So after passing a test, you get access to the job dashboard from which you can claim a job. And this is what the UI for a translator looks like. And I apologize again, it's kind of washed out, but basically each of these sort of light and dark text sections is an individual job. And the idea is to let the translator can using tools, they iteratively improve quality. And so we do job validation within the UI. So what you're seeing here, for example, is obvious sort of highlighting misspellings. We do have glossary support. And so if a term exists in the glossary and in the source but is not in the translation, then we'll highlight and be like, are you sure you want to submit it without using a term that we find in the glossary? We do some syntax checking for HTML, and then we have this feature called triple brackets, which allows a user to submit content and embed some text in triple brackets that the translator knows not to translate, because sometimes you want to have a little bit of context within the body of text to give some hints or some kind of resource, and it's not counted towards the translation. So after a job is submitted by the translator, depending on how long the translator has been working in the system and what their sort of reputation is, the job gets sent, if they're new, it'll get sent to a senior translator. And the senior translator uses a tool that we've built internally called GoCheck. And using this tool, they'll sort of go through the translation and mark up any issues that they might find. And that process ends up with a score. It's aggregated into a score. And that score, if it's below, for example, you saw at standard 7. So if it's below 7, then we know, OK, well, it's not meeting our expectations. And so the job gets sent back to either the translator or the senior translator might just kind of fix it up there. But basically, we can catch it before it goes to the customer. And then once it's cleaned up, then it gets sent on. So for example, at business level, when a customer orders a business level translation, we have to make sure that it meets at least a score of 8. Otherwise, it's not being passed on to the customer. So most of the translators, they have the opportunity to fix it up. But of course, if they don't cooperate, then we can either demote them or suspend their account. So with this, we try and make a lot of this data as transparent as possible to the translators, and we're doing more to actually open it up for everyone to see. But basically, what you're seeing here is a translator's dashboard, and we show the score that they have internally as well as the speed. And so they can get a sense of, they understand sort of how we're perceiving their ability and capability based on the GoCheck score system that we've built. So overseeing all of this is the TOPS team that I mentioned, the translator operations. And they've developed a metric called the language pair health index. And this is kind of like a GDP for a country. It sort of gives you an impression of the health of the productivity within that language pair. So there's a language pair health index per language pair. And the main 3 sort of pillars behind it are speed, quality, and scale. And there's different parameters that go into each one. So for example, 95th percentile first action time. This is basically the time it takes for an action to happen on a job that's been submitted, whether it's picked up, whether it's been flagged by a translator because there's something wrong with the content, whether a comment has been left for more clarification by the customer or the submitter. And the idea is basically, when you, in the sort of time span for a translation to get done, there's the time to translate it, and then there's the time to actually start up to from submission to starting the actual translation. And the time to translate something, there's kind of an upper bound, right? It's how fast you can type and how quickly you can translate something. But the time for it to actually get picked up by the crowd, we feel we can shrink as much as possible, hopefully down to 0. And so we spend a lot of time trying to figure out how we can make sure that some kind of action happens on a job. And it's not always just getting picked up by a translator, but sometimes we need a bit more context from a customer that submits it. There's a couple other metrics, so the average GoCheck score, and then of course for scale, how many active translators do we actually have, and what's the actual volume in it, what kind of churn. So all these parameters are run in this spreadsheet is one of the sheets that the translator operations team looks at. And some of you might be amused to hear that it's actually connected to a database via an ODBC driver in the background. And so it's pretty much kept up to date in real time. And what the TOPS team is looking for is any scores for a language pair that might be below 7, because that's our lower bound. And so if they see one, then they know to go across and figure out, OK, which of the parameters are sort of skewing this number. And then they can go in and take action on it. So do we have enough translators? Maybe a lot of content came in recently for a new language pair that we've added and we need to acquire more. And so they're constantly looking at this and trying to keep everything healthy, all the language pairs healthy. Oh, and so the average fat time that we have right now, it's about 260 minutes, which is about just over 4 hours. And so you're pretty much guaranteed as a submitter of content into our system that something will happen. You'll get some kind of action or response within 4 hours of having submitted it. And that's the 95th percentile, so it's pretty nice. So, of course, we want to empower our translators as well. And we do this with some of the features, tools that you might expect. We have a forum that all the translators can have a dialogue in. We also use Basecamp, for example, for senior translators, so the senior translators can coordinate amongst each other, share some learnings, some observations, and across different language pairs. And we also release newsletters and do some surveys as well. So it's a pretty vibrant community, and they have a lot of pride in the work that they do. And yeah, so all of these tie together. And this is how we sort of manage our crowd on a sort of more analytical level. And so with these tools, what kind of metrics are we actually seeing? I ran a query recently and found that we're doing between 1 and 3 million units a week right now. And of course, it's quite a fluctuation, but that's one of the cool things about using a crowd. It's very just in time. It's also the fact that we're using an API and have the infrastructure to be able to scale up and scale down is pretty neat. We're also doing, so this comes to about 148 words per minute a couple weeks ago. And for a point of reference, the fastest typer in the world can do about 216 words a minute. And so we still have room to grow. Of course, it's not just each individual translator typing at this speed, but and we have about a little over 10% of our translator pool is actually active. Now this is on a per week, so on a per month basis it'd be a lot higher because not every translator is working every single week. And this applies to across the 46 language pairs that we currently support. So that was sort of the mechanical analytical approach to how we manage the crowd. And of course, there's more of a human emotional aspect as well. And so I want to share a little bit about how we give a face to our translators. Here we see, so we run this blog series called Faces of Gengo, where we introduce some of our translators. And for example, we have Mohammed. He translates English to Arabic. He's actually a chemist by day, and he translates at night. He even has a YouTube channel where he teaches chemistry. So I thought that was kind of cool. We've got Sayuri. She lives in Brazil. She's an English to Portuguese Brazilian translator. And we found out that she actually translates between her laptop and her desktop. So she likes to move around a little bit and uses different interfaces. So that's something that I'll touch on in a second. Then we have Orajiha, who's based, where is he based? In Nigeria, thank you. And he actually has a German degree and is translating between English and German. And we want to know a little bit more about sort of their work environment. So in Orajiha's case, he actually works in an environment where the power is very unreliable, and sometimes it goes out, and so he has to go to the cafe. In Mohammed's case, as I mentioned, he also records his chemistry YouTube channel from this table. We have Rainer, a translator in Germany who likes to work in his tracksuit, and sometimes he goes for a jog in between jobs. And Lara, she actually is an India-trained yoga instructor, but currently recently gave birth to a daughter, and so needs to work at home. And so on Gengo, she's able to work and take care of a child at the same time. So as I mentioned, our translators, they use various tools and various interfaces, and so we need to take into consideration those differences. And so we design around in a way that the translation interface can be worked in a large screen or a small screen. And of course, we also have this feature where you can full screen it and then toggle between a horizontal mode and a vertical mode. So our focus on design and UX has helped us sort of create this emotional connection with our translators as well, because this is the interface, the product that they're using. And we've noticed that we can see this sort of being exhibited in their passion to help customers. So you can sort of faintly see the lines which break up the discussion, but basically a lot of our translators end up going the extra mile to even do some research. So we've had some content that had some historical references, and some of the translators will actually do some research for the customer, completely pro bono, unasked to do it. And so in this case, what we have is an application description where the translator was like, what do you mean by bundle? And the customer gives kind of an explanation. And the translator's like, OK, so now I get it. Maybe I can use this term in German, and the customer's happy. A more sort of detailed example, in this case, the customer actually included some instructions, gave a purpose, and mentioned the type of tone that they're looking for. And so down at the bottom, the translator is asking, well, what do you mean by stretch? This is for a solitaire game, and an iPhone solitaire game, and so they thought, they're not really sure sort of what kind of context stretches should be used for. And of course, the translator, the customer could have provided like a style guide or a glossary, but they did not in this case, and so there's this discourse happening. And the translator asks and gets a response, and so it gives a suggestion. Now, in this case, the translator actually knew the target language, and so the customer knew the target language, and so said, that's not quite right. Can you give it another try? And the translator takes another shot, and sure enough, the customer in this case is happy. So we find that our translators, they seem to have a propensity for customer support. And so what we noticed, this kind of popped up on our radar, but one of the earliest translators at Gengo actually joined WhatsApp as a customer support rep, and was one of the earlier employees there. So we thought that was kind of neat. But this is definitely not a common example of how you would have career growth through Gengo. But it's kind of fun nonetheless. So I started with this definition of crowdsourcing, but I'm going to tweak it a little bit. I think really they're real people. This idea that they're just kind of remote kind of makes it a little too distant. Of course, they're using a lot of online tools, but they're not just working. They're also here to learn as well. And we find there's interesting cases of, for example, in Japan, the car industry is very deep and very rich, a lot of information there. And there's a couple individuals who are taking advantage of this information arbitrage and finding newsletters about race reports about cars and translating them from Japanese into English. And so we have a number of translators who are really passionate about cars and racing, and they're always the first ones to grab these kinds of jobs and translate them. And for them, they already have a little bit of background in the industry, but they're also learning as they do this translation as well, and it's enriching their own individual knowledge as well. So that's pretty cool. And of course, it's not just huge stuff, but sometimes it's kind of quirky. Earlier on, maybe you saw there was a reference to love letters as some of the content that we translate. And I think we do see some content that individuals might be a little bit embarrassed to actually give to someone that they have to meet. So this level of anonymity works to our advantage. So that's kind of where we are right now. And I want to share a little bit about where we hope to go. Like any company, we have our challenges, both in the product and in growing the team. So on the product side, we're constantly iterating, and we've learned, so I showed the very simple order form in the beginning, and we've learned we need to capture more data from individuals who submit content. And so now we've updated our order form to actually ask for a purpose, and based on what they select, we'll give a recommendation on the quality level. We also ask what kind of tone, and we give an opportunity for the customer to submit some copy instructions for the translator. And the instructions can be a link even to a site, and hopefully, as I've shown, the translators actually go through the effort to load up the page and sort of review where it's going to be used. On the company side, we're global. We have our Tokyo office is about 30 people. Our office in San Mateo is 11 or 12. We also have an engineer in Singapore. We've got 2 individuals in China, and we're I like to think we're quite good at making sure, even despite that small team, that we're always on the same page. We do a lot of Skype. Every morning there's some kind of Skype conference call or a group meeting with everyone. And so if we continue to do this, I think we can keep enabling sort of businesses to address a larger market. And so a couple other interesting integrations that we've seen, I mentioned the Zendesk one. On the left side, basically, these are more platforms. So it's sort of a B2B2C, where the platform wants to give the option to their users to order translation, for example. And then on the right-hand side, we have examples, for example, of platforms that are services that are translating content directly. So in Eventbrite's case, they have a 24-hour SLA on support. And sometimes they don't have enough staff. And so for the languages that they don't have enough staff for, they'll actually use Gengo to translate the customer support inquiries. In the always writing, oops. What happened there? Did I run out of time? Oh, it went into sleep mode, maybe. Or out of battery. There we go. It's actually, you might want to plug in the power. Here we go. Let's see that. Okay. Let's see. Are we good? Okay, great. So the Always Writing is basically a online cycling shop out of the UK, and they have a product feed that they're translating into Japanese and Spanish and German as well. And for Jawbone, we're also doing a couple of the product descriptions. So that's kind of that's about Gengo. Before I conclude, I just want to mention that we are hiring, of course, kind of obligatory pitch, marketing, sales, and we're actually expanding our community management team. And what else is there? Oh, free credits. So if you want to give Gengo a try, you can go to gengo.com/try. We'll give you $25 in free credits, and please let us know how it goes. So thanks.
All right, thank you very much. I hope you enjoyed being here on campus.